Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and I am joined this week by Harry Jobson.
I'm here. I'm present. Yes, sir.
I just want to say up front, my throat I've been sick the past week, basically. So my voice might sound a bit different. So if my audio sounds like different or whatever, that's why. Yeah. So there's just we haven't had time to record, so that's why it's been a couple of weeks. But anyway, we are looking at The Incredibles and Incredibles 2. This was Harry's choice, actually. Harry, I asked Harry what he would like to cover on the show at some point. Harry, you wanted to talk about sort of more you want to talk about some Pixar films and specifically. Yeah, you sort of mentioned films that sort of had sequels that were took a long time.
I've been feeling those. I feel like there's a weird genre of Pixar films that are the same, that all fall under a similar umbrella of having sequels that didn't come, like legacy sequels that didn't come out until into a decade after. Monsters University came out not recently after Monsters Inc., but late enough where it's. But you've got The Incredibles.
12 years.
Finding Dory is one as well, like Finding Nemo. But I remember The Incredibles being one of my favorite films, like growing up, and I was so excited. I remember when Incredibles 2 came out. I just thought as well. Plus, it worked really well with them showing the film locally at the cinemas. So being able to see The Incredibles at the cinema, it worked really well with sort of the idea I had about follow-up sequels. But The Incredibles 2 is interesting, and sort of like the way they build off the Incredibles world. But it is a superhero film. You know how I feel about The Incredibles.
Before we get into The Incredibles specifically, Pixar always, for the longest time, they seemed very finicky when choosing like sequels they made. They sort of, if you look at sort of, I would consider the golden era of Pixar was from Toy Story to Toy Story 3. That's sort of the peak of that. And you look at those films, and the only sequels in that era are Toy Story sequels. You've got Toy Stories 2 and 3, and that's it. And from 1995 to 2010, you only get those two sequels, and everything else is like an original idea, because we've got A Bug's Life, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, and Up. And it's a truly incredible run of films from the studio. And then you look at their run sort of post Toy Story 3, and you've got Cars 2, Monsters University, like Finding Dory. They're making all these sequels finally after all these years, And for the most part, these sequels don't live up to the original films in any way. Like Monsters University, vastly weaker than Monsters Inc. Finding Dory, not really like that amazing. But yeah, The Incredibles, there was a re-release in the cinema recently, and so Harry and we went to the cinema together to go see it, because I haven't been to the cinema that recently, but it was interesting, because The Incredibles is sort of a film I've seen a lot. It was a film I watched as a kid, and so we went in, and there was the traditional Pixar short film which played beforehand, which I don't believe you had seen. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing that before. I don't know if you'd seen it.
No, I hadn't seen it before.
Yeah. And then we sat down and we watched it, and it was fucking great. It's
great film.
I mean,
it's great film.
Just the moment when the title card comes up and like the music starts playing, it's just like it's first of all, this, like, to get into the film, I think the score is fantastic. It's and like that moment when just sort of the main theme plays, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it just it makes you feel things.
Yeah, and not just that. Even though it's so triumphant, like it is such like a. It feels pure. It feels like a pure sound for something superhero related, and not just that, but it's all like a call to action. But not even the intro of the film, where they're doing the interview style. This is back when Pixar was so creative. That's such a creative way to start an animated film about superheroes, and it's so iconic. I have a really deep love for this film, especially with all the superhero saturation you get nowadays with multiverse expanding storylines and having to watch every piece of content related to it. And if you're out of the loop, you lose a big key factor, and it's the universe is on the line. Sometimes it's just better if you have a pretty basic villain with a pretty basic backstory and a pretty basic goal.
Yeah, I think to sort of after we saw the film, I believe you said something where I
It's
believe
the
you said
greatest superhero
The
film I've ever
Incredibles is the
watched.
greatest super, and those are some big words because like I don't agree. I think there's a few superhero films I would personally take
No.
over The Incredibles. I think Incredibles would be up there for me though. I think Incredibles is like a really great film, but I personally would take at least two Spider-Man films over it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think The Incredibles is a great film. I think it's like amongst the best of Pixar. There's other superhero films that I personally find that I get sort of more out of. But yeah, to sort of, I think Incredibles is, but to talk more specifically about The Incredibles, I think, yeah, it's a pretty great film. I think it's my third favorite Pixar, no, fourth favorite Pixar film, actually. I think but it is a remarkably strong film. I don't really think there's a lot wrong with it other than like, no, I don't, it doesn't quite hit like perfection. Like it's great, but it's not quite the masterpiece that other Pixar films are for me personally. But I mean, yeah, to talk about it, the animation, that's the thing I noticed rewatching the film in the cinema is how well the animation holds up 20
Yeah,
years later.
absolutely.
As much as I love, stuff like Toy Story, the animation doesn't hold up as well. The Incredibles, watching it in a cinema, I really got I really was like, huh, that animation looks pretty great for something that's 20 years old. And I thought like maybe it would have looked a bit odd because it's like 20 years old and there's been such advancements in CGI animation. But like watching it, it's like, oh no, this could be released like today and it would still be as good. And that's something that interesting about Incredibles 2 is the animation like is 14 years, it's 14 years later, but it doesn't look as good. I don't know, something about the animation in Incredibles 2 looks kind of off. I don't like, we'll get on to Incredibles 2 later, but it doesn't
Yeah.
look quite right. And I don't know why that is.
The first Incredibles film, I think, yeah, not only does the animation hold up, the cast, the voice acting done by
Mm.
like a lot of the core cast here is awesome. That's like it is really well done. I think that and they're really well sort of
I think the voice actress for Violet, yeah, that one doesn't quite work because it's like if they'd gotten like sort of a teenage girl to do it, it would have worked a lot better. Like they got a kid to voice Dash. I think that would have, but they did get like a 30-something-year-old woman, and it
yeah,
just
Sarah
doesn't
Val.
sound right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it doesn't work nearly as well. But I mean, yeah, the voice cast across the board are very
How good is
gr-
Jason Lee as Syndrome?
yeah, I
I
remember.
I geeked out about that in the cinema. I completely didn't
Yeah.
realize it until recently because they do have some big names to this. You got Craig T. Nelson, Samuel L. Jackson, Jason Lee, which are quite, especially at the time, were quite big actors. I think Brad
Mm.
Bird as Edna Mode is a stroke of genius as well. But
Yeah, I mean, I think overall the voice cast is very good because you've got Craig T. Nelson, and he's not got like, because he's not really like, because a lot of these actors aren't really voice actors. They're sort of just like regular, but I think, which is I think a problem now with animation is they sort of go a bit too hard in getting just like big celebrity voices instead of like voice actors or voices that, I mean, Chris Pratt is in however many animated films, but with Pixar, they're very good about getting actors who aren't necessarily voice actors, but their voices fit those parts. Like they got Tom Hanks, like then they got Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. They worked very well for Toy Story, for example. And I think the voice cast works really well here. I mean, the highlight for me was Samuel L. Jackson because he's always a highlight in just sort of every film he's in, basically. Yeah, it's like genuinely just great voice acting across the board, basically. And I think the overall look and design of the film, there's like a really great stylistic sort of edge to it. It's very stylized.
Whereas this one is the first time that the animation actually looks, while being wholly focused on humans, but like the characters, I think the exaggerations that they have is really, really like well executed.
Yeah, they seem to really like figure out like, oh, this is how you animate people.
They're quite sharp.
And make them look, and look like Whereas because there had been human characters, as you mentioned, human characters had appeared in those other films, but they just they didn't look right. They looked like dolls or something. They looked very
They looked uncanny,
almost like the like the Robert Zemeckis era of like Polar Express. Like
there were two.
Uncanny Valley.
Yeah. There were two, I think, trying to go for something that looked too real back then. And again, it would end up, because of the animation, that would look doll-ish. But you take in, like, again, for example, like each shape, even though they're all in the same family, the shape of each character is so drastically different that you can pick them off obviously just by their silhouette. Like Bob is literally just like rectangle head, big triangle body. Or Syndrome, for example. Syndrome has this weird teardrop-shaped head with a massive chin, where it's like no human would look like that, but it's the exaggeration that creates into him being sort of like to our modern-day incel gamer nerd. Yeah, and I love having that as the villain. It doesn't have to be this like world-threatening villain. It just has to be a smart kid with a grudge. But the film also deals with some really heavy stuff. Like, they don't get into the fact that Bob sees all of his mates die and he hides behind one of his, like, dead friend's body. The fact that they're suppressed people because of their difference. The fact that, like...
I mean, the allegories are very fucking apparent. It's like, oh, I wonder what this is referring to. And I appreciate it when animation doesn't talk down. It is like, no, we're gonna address these kinds of things because I mean, it's very, very like this
is far from a kid's film.
Yeah, it's this like can be enjoyed by this isn't squarely like, whereas something like, I think like Toy Story or Finding Nemo or Bug's Life, those are sort of more squarely like, oh, these are kids' films, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think they're good. They're very good.
But this tells a very adult story.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some really, I mean, there's even some sort of adult sort of innuendos in there as well. Of like, there's sort of that montage Bob has where his wife, where Elastigirl keeps pulling him back into the house, presumably for sex or something. Like, it's a very...
And this is when Pixar, I think, entered their prime. I don't think they came in smashing off the gate. I do think the Toy Story films are great. And I also think that A Bug's Life and Finding Nemo are considered like prime Pixar films. But The Incredibles was
as well.
And Monsters Inc. as well. I think this is a really good representation of their prime. I think Monsters Inc. or Finding Nemo is when they really started to come into it. Yeah, I don't know, it hits all the beats. I think that the stories they tell, but also it's a really nice family film. It's something that I think we miss so much nowadays. I can't remember the last time a film that I would say was this caliber or like this came out. About the family being able to see it being going on to be considered a classic as well.
Because I
But
think
this being like something my dad loves, but also something that I love, and then that my kids are gonna love, no matter. Even though this film could span 3 generations without anyone thinking, "Oh, why am I watching this kids film?"
Yeah, no, I think certain. I mean, like for a recent example, the Super Mario Brothers movie, I enjoyed it, but it is sort of insular. But it's you don't really get picked. Like as much as I think Pixar's great, a lot of the time now, sort of recently, they don't quite like the films they make don't really work as well. Like they sort of do feel a bit like, oh, this is a kids film. They don't sort of they're not generational. You know, I think sort
Yeah,
of in this sort of 2000s from like Incredibles, Cars is sort of an outlier. Cars is sort of I think very firmly for kids. But I mean, you
yeah,
look at Incredibles, Ratatouille, Wall-E, Up, Toy Story 3, like those are all like kids can enjoy these, but those are family films, you know. Um and I think that I think that sort of animation is sort of in a weird place now because it's you sort of don't get film like every now and again there'll be an animated film that comes out and is just spectacular. Like, you know, I talk about it all the time, but Puss in Boots 2, like that is incredible, and I
yeah,
think that can. But you know, you sort of look at other animation, and they're always limited. You know, like recently there was the new Beavis and Butthead film, which I really loved, but that is like again, it's more insular in its audience. There was the Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio, which again I really loved, but is very insular for its audience. You know, that's not like a family film. That's sort of a bit more of a
well, yeah. I think it's such a piece of its time as well. But I don't have anything negative to say about this film specifically. I don't think that there's anything that I find they do wrong at all. There are a few bits because when you do think about it like a bit deeper, you go, "Oh, a lot of people in this film are just ready to kill children." Like I know they're villains, but in the one of the towards the beginning of the film, when Bon Voyage, which is a hilariously camp, he literally puts a bomb on the child.
he's literally like, yeah, I'm gonna kill this child. Like and it's like he's just like that's just an evil villain. And I'm like, and I mean that opening sort of section where we see, which I think is a great sort of opening few minutes. I don't like where yeah, Mr. Like he saves the guy from like jumping to his death, and then he gets sued for it, and I'm like, that's good. It's and then he has to like stop the train, and it's like, and I noted, and I was like, huh, there were two superhero films released in 2004 where the main hero has to stop a train from falling off a bridge. But like the action sequences, like when they go to the forest, like sort of on the island towards the end of the film, like it's something really kinetic, like the stuff where Dash is running, where like they're running from the ships and everything, and Dash like he runs across the water and everything, and
Oh, when he runs across the water, that is beautiful.
it's a like something about water in animation just looks so nice. Like because with animation you can just kind of create what you want.
But the way
You know, so you
the
can
way it
create.
breaks down with him, like you can hear the impact of the water in the like. Well, whereas like when he's running across the jungle floor, we're gonna say jungle rainforest. But when
Yeah.
he's running through the island, it's very like mulchy and the score. But when like it cuts out for the really high pitched ting 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 as he's on the water, and then it
Yeah.
comes back into the score, and I'm like, oh my god, I love that scene more than anything.
Yeah, I think
You-
this film it really does a great. Another thing I noticed watching it in a cinema is like the sound design. Like there's so many like just the way like sort of the sort of general aesthetic of the film really it really sort of creates something unique. Like the sound design, like when the ships like they just sort of make like these whirring noises they're making. and like it's just so like the sound design. You like the cinema is like the best way to watch films. Let's just be honest. But
Yeah.
even then, just sort of the visual design, like there's so many unique but sort of iconic designs, like the Omni Droid, for example. That's like a great design there. You know, just I mean, even the logo, like the Incredibles logo, it's very simple, but it is iconic. You know, like the film is
Yeah. It's
the
an
film.
eye.
It's just an eye, but you see that and you're immediately like, oh, that's the Incredibles.
What'd you give the
And
first film?
I give the first film a 9 out of 10. I think it's just a remarkably strong film. Every scene basically works. There's so many great moments throughout the runtime. It's like I could go on for so long about how great the film is. Um, I just sort of want a couple quick things I want to touch on. I think that it's just like the act, like all like the third act when they're fighting the Omni Droid is phenomenally well crafted. Just the way that the film sort of builds to that, and we see all these powers, all these moments, everything comes together, really nicely in that final act. I think is great. And then the stuff with Syndrome at the end, I will say, it does feel a bit tacked on. I'm sure that was always the plan, but it
Oh,
just
how
feels
he
like
dies.
well, sort of that final scene because it's like like
It's
it's
an
sort of a
afterthought.
common
It
thing.
feels like an afterthought. It feels like the film had finished and that they had chosen to they were like, oh well, we didn't really finish off Syndrome.
But yeah, I think it's a great film. I give it 9 out of 10. Top tier Pixar.
Ring the bell. Ring the bell, ring a ding ding, extra, extra, read all about it. This film is a 10 out of 10. I love this film. It is my second favorite Pixar film. I will say that. No spoilers as to what's number one.
I'm trying to think
But this film, I think I could watch this film, rain, hail, or shine. The universe is such a. I'm struggling to get the words now. I'm actually speechless. But I do find that the film does a really great job in just telling its story. And the animation, the sound design, I think, again, the very end gets a bit choppy. And there are bits, for example, there's a lot of people getting blended up in this film. A lot of people get stuck in jet. And I love that it's a callback to Edna's Nookips because it's funny.
No.
From the big story beats to the little bits, such as as a kid, my favorite joke in the whole film was Edna mode and guest, and because it was very visual. Now it's still Edna. It's still, my God, you've gotten fat. Okay, come in. Each character, each interaction has a moment for everyone. And
no
I just don't see myself I don't see myself ever not liking The Incredibles. I think The Incredibles is Pixar's best film, but The Monsters Inc. is my favorite. But I think The Incredibles is the best we will ever see at Pixar.
I mean, no, fair enough. So I just want to touch on, as I always touch on, the Oscars. This one was nominated for 4 Oscars, which is just crazy that an animated film will get nominated for more than one Oscar. Nowadays, animated film. So it was nominated for it. Well, it won Best Animated Feature, beating Shrek 2 and Shark Tale. I think fair enough. It's the best of those 3 films there. It was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay, which is very interesting because a lot of Pixar films got nominated for original screenplay, like Toy Story did. And the film was also nominated for sound editing and sound mixing, which it won sound editing. But yeah, anyway, then 14 years passed and people were clamoring for an Incredibles 2. For the longest time, people were like,
I
when are we
dreamed of it
getting
as a kid.
Incredibles 2? And I was like,
You say, end the movie on a cliffhanger. Not really.
Kind
well, not
of.
really, but
Not
as a
really
kid,
a
it felt like
they
it.
sort of
They teed up a second film.
Yeah, they sort of and then they announced that they were making a sequel, But it took them for so many years to be like to confirm that we're doing this. Because Brad Bird, he went off, he made Ratatouille, which is great. He did Mission Impossible 4, and then he did Tomorrowland. Well, it was announced in 2014 in a shareholder meeting that Bob Iger said, "Oh yeah, we're working on Incredibles 4," and Brad Bird started writing a script for it in 2015. So it took them about 4 years or so to make it, which isn't too bad. There were some sort of complications with the film, from my understanding. They basically released they initially planned to release the film on June 21st, 2019, but because they were ahead in terms of like making the film was pulled up to June 5th, 2018. So they lost an entire year basically of production they could have had. And maybe losing that year of production
is the reason the
is
film
why the
feels rushed.
film doesn't work as well. Yeah. I don't, to make it clear, I don't dislike the film. I think on the whole it is a good film. But this is what we waited 14 years for.
Yeah, when you put
This
it in that
is,
context, like it's
I
way
think,
more forgettable. The whole film is just, hey, do you want to see the same film again, but with the roles reversed? And imagine Bob trying to be a stay-at-home dad. I think it tells a very family story, but it suffers from the same problems I spoke about new Pixar being too soft.
yeah, it's not a bad movie, but it's like compared to Brad Bird's previous Pixar work and Brad Bird's animation work, like The Iron Giant is a great film. So Brad
Amazing
Bird
film.
knows how to work in animation, and he'd done 2 Pixar films beforehand. It's just like, this is the idea you had. I don't like, and yeah, it's not bad. It's just like I expected so much more from it. So I didn't actually see this film in the cinema when it came out. I had heard from people who had seen it that this wasn't actually that good. And I was like, well, I don't really want to see it then because I'll just be disappointed with it. And you said before we started recording, it has a 93% or something on Rotten Tomatoes.
93%. If I search up
Fucking
Incredibles
Christ.
2, just in Google, IMDb 7.5, Rotten Tomatoes 93, Metacritic also 84, Metacritic 80. So I don't know what that means. Let me just jump into the actual Tomatoes website though. So it's an 84. It's an 84 audience score, and it's a 93 certified fresh.
Comparatively, the first one has 97%. So only 4% difference.
It's insanely
The
high.
audience score for The Incredibles, the first one, is 75%.
That's
Like,
ridiculous.
audiences
That
on
is
average
ridiculous.
like the second Incredibles more. Like, what the fuck is that? That is fucking insane.
Genuinely, this like it is a. I will say I love this. I do love the second film as well. I think it does a good job at a few things, and I think it does a pretty mediocre job at a lot of things.
But yeah, look, I don't dislike this film. I sound like I'll be negative on it when I'm not. But yeah, the animation, it's like, technically, it's very impressive. Like, the character models, they look really weird. I'm not crazy for thinking that, right? Like, the
No, I
character
agree.
models look weird.
Yeah, they look like more drawn.
Yeah, like Bob looks like shit. Like when he just doesn't look
Yeah,
right.
I don't like. And if we're getting into the negatives that we have with the film, I also don't. Yeah, one, I feel like somehow the animation got worse. I also think all the colors of everything is a bit off in this film. Like like it's all
Yeah.
in fucking golden hour or something, and like there's been like a filter put over the top of it, and also the horror elements of the villain. I don't. That was such a weird choice for me. I do love the fact that Bob Odenkirk basically just plays like
Ah,
Better Call Saul.
I
in
love
the
I look. I love Bob Odenkirk. I think Bob Odenkirk's great, and he always just randomly, occasionally, he'll just randomly show up in things, and I'm just like, oh, he's just here. Yeah, I really liked that he was in this. His sister, though, I thought was a very, very underdeveloped character, especially
yeah.
when, spoiler alert, they reveal she's the villain. It's like, oh, that's not. She just does not have like the gravitas that Syndrome has. Like Syndrome as a villain is just he just oozes like charisma and character, and Evelyn just
Yeah.
like doesn't have that. It's like it's fine to do a female villain, but you do need to like develop a
Development
villain.
problem.
I kind of would have preferred if it was both Evelyn and like Bob Odenkirk's character and her character as the villain. I think
Yeah.
that would have worked a lot
No, just
nicer.
real Bob Odenkirk. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that
no,
could
I
have worked a
agree.
lot nicer because it could have been like Hot Fuzz. How it gets revealed in Hot Fuzz that there's like a ton of people doing the the
Yeah.
killings. I'm
It's a
like, and that's
society, the NWA.
yeah, but no, I think that would work because you could get some really interesting moments where it's like, oh, how did like she's running like the screen slave is like running away, and then she bursts into another room and she's like, how did they get that far already? And I mean, that's just Hot Fuzz. I'm just pitching Hot Fuzz again, but it's
Yeah.
like you could get
But
some creative
make
ideas
it
with
Hot
that.
Fuzz. Make it Hot Fuzz though. Like, I don't know. I just like to get. I'm just gonna say my piece in one long chunk. I think when it comes to my negatives, so picture this as a pros and cons list. But when you look at my negatives, I think I don't care for the entire villain and villain arc. I think that the animation is off. Everything to do with the visual is quite off. It just doesn't feel like how it should. The Pars live in way too nice of a house. They've become now unrelatable as characters. So the whole point was that, yeah, they're superheroes, but they're also just like a normal family. And now it definitely doesn't feel like that. Yeah, I feel like the film is just a bit forgettable overall, and it doesn't build up enough off what the foundations that the first film set up. Take example, the end of the first film, the Underminer. You do not understand how excited I was as a child about the concept of getting to watch them fight the Underminer. Like that was such like a, and then just to have it to be like a, yeah, I mean, it kickstarts the film, but it does not matter in like the rest of the film. I felt like the Underminer should have impact as a child. Like looking back on it now, the Underminer is just like a funny way to finish the first film. It's like a funny name, but there are positives I have to the film. The score's still great. It's still like everything that was good about the first. Not everything that was good, but like again, it's nice to have a second Incredibles film. You get to like same uniforms, you get a bit more Edna mode, more character, more time with the characters that you love. But I don't rate this film like higher than a 7.
Yeah, I sort of echo a lot of those sentiments. I just don't. It just doesn't work as well. It sort of feels the writing just doesn't work. It doesn't have anything,
Now, if this was just a random
or doesn't
superhero film
work as
from
well.
like,
Yeah.
if this was just like a superhero film that was made by like Illumination or something, I reckon it'd be fine. But I think because of the foundations that Incredibles set, again, the second one just falls short.
That's the thing. It seems so much worse than it is, purely because it's compared to the original film. It just doesn't have. It just like yeah. I mean, and look, the voice acting, Samuel L. Jackson, he's still great. I still like Craig T. Nelson, Holly Hunter, like all the voice cast. They're all still good, you know. But it just doesn't. It's just disappointing, and I just wish I didn't have to say that. I wish I could say, no, this is a great film. You know, it's not as good as the first one because you know I was never expecting it to be, but I would have liked a film that at least rival first film, but unfortunately, it doesn't. and it just, even the action sequences aren't as nice. They don't work as well. It feels more meandering. It feels less tightly written and scripted. It just is a unfortunate disappointment. So I give it a 7 out of 10 as well. I do like it, don't get me wrong, but it's just compared to what the original film is, it doesn't hold a candle. I believe there's been talks of a third one, which I'm not really that excited about now. Like, I'll see it, but I just don't have as much interest in it
Well, because I
now.
think they know that, like the third. Okay, so that brings up actually a very interesting idea, and it relates into what I was going to talk about, which is these sequels in other Pixar films.
Mhm.
I think the fate for these older Pixar films goes one of three ways. Either it is actually a good sequel, there isn't anything built upon it, you just get an okay second movie and it works well. For example, Monsters University. Again, not as such a drastic time difference, but still. You've got The Cars, which is the sequel underperforms, isn't as good. So they make a third legacy film about a main character hanging up the boots of some kind. Then you've got the last option, which is that it is a bad sequel. You end second with a tarnished legacy, but you do nothing about it. And I think Incredibles, for me anyway, for me personally, it was either going to be a bad sequel or it has to go the Cars route. And if they're coming out with a third film, I would be very interested to see it.
I think what they could do is do a film where the characters are older. Like Dash is like a teenager, Violet's grown up and she's an
It's a
adult,
college, yeah.
she's in college, yeah. Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, they're like sort of retired, or they're basically, I think there is the possibility for them to have something really interesting with the third one if they make it. But I just don't know what they can do. Well, see, the thing is, I feel like it is very likely they'll make a third one because the second one made like $1.2 billion.
Oh, yeah, no, there's money.
So there's clearly some kind of money in them making another one, So I think it is very, very plausible they make a third one at some point in the future because there's money in it. But if they do make a third one, I won't be as interested. I'll see it, but the desire for a third one is kind of gone. But yeah, that's I think pretty much it. Unless there's anything else you want to say, Harry.
Yeah, I think the first one sets up such grounds for such a great film, and the second one falls short. And I
Yeah.
think in almost every aspect that made the first one great, I think if anything, it says the disappointment that is the second one just it speaks to how great the first one is. And I think anyone,
Yeah.
whether you're a fan of animation or you're like, I don't want to watch a kids film, or go back and watch Monsters Inc. No, go watch them. Yeah, well, watch Monsters Inc., but go back and watch The Incredibles.
And that's it, yeah. Incredibles 2 isn't bad. It's just disappointing because of how good that first film is. But yeah, that's pretty much it, really. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. My voice is still fine, I think. And then, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this one. And then the next planned episodes are going to be hopefully, if everything works out, going to be sort of a big franchise retrospective. Because Harry hasn't actually seen these films. So I think there's a lot of interesting material. Because I'm looking forward, because I've only seen some of these films, and Harry's seen none of them. So we're going to go in with sort of very different perspectives, and I'm looking forward to it though. So that's hopefully going to be that's the next 2 weeks. But yeah, thank you, Harry, again for joining me for this week's.
Oh, I love to be here.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.